Hello folks, and welcome back to Mod of the Month, where we showcase some of the best builds completed over the last month over in the BitTech forums. Corsair has upped the ante and are providing a host of Hydro X themed goodies, with first place netting a choice of an XC9 or XC7 RGB CPU block, a choice of GPU block from their range, an XD5 RGB pump reservoir combo, and a Commander Pro. Second place gets a choice of CPU block and GPU block, and third gets a choice of CPU block. As ever, if you want to be in with a chance of taking part and netting some pretty awesome Corsair goodies, all you need to do is have a completed project log posted over on the BitTech forums. Enjoy the builds.
First up, a huge congratulations has to go to last month's winner, which was Onda by Explore Modding. Now, Onda sort of ran away with the voting both on the forums and on Discord, but it's not hard to see why. The unusual form combined with the excellent use of materials really set this build on track for success. Now let's see who the nominees are for this month. Let's kick off with NESPC by EVA. Now, NES case mods are fairly popular. In fact, there's definitely a retro charm to be found in the design, as well as the shared cultural memory of the console. However, whilst most NES mods make use of the real cases from broken machines and so on, EVA decided instead to go with the whole hog and build a chassis from scratch that closely resembles the original, both in appearance and in dimensions. The cool thing about this approach is that they've gained full control over the structure. The whole design was first drawn up in SolidWorks and then each part handled using an appropriate process. The main chassis was then constructed from bent sheet aluminium, sporting a clamshell design that meets in the middle. This provides room for a full ITX chassis inside, including a discrete GPU, and manages to keep everything internal. Now, details are also abound in this mod, such as the machined and tumbled brackets on the front, which resemble the controller port section on the original NES. Similarly, there's also a hidden optical drive bay, which sits under what would have been the cartridge cover. This all allows for a supremely compact design that's both faithful to the original, but also thoroughly new. I've got to admit, there is something a little bit nostalgic to me about ROG Pagoda. So back when I first got into modding as a teenager, one of the classic techniques was layering coloured acrylic. It was a great way to inject some high contrast colour into a structure, especially when combined with internal lighting, and of course it could all be done by hand as well. However, it's largely fallen out of fashion. Now, Jones opted to make use of this classic technique, laser cutting it though, with also combining it with printed spacers in order to construct an H-frame-esque chassis. Orange and black is a bold and bright combination, which has been tempered somewhat by the use of clear acrylic in the slat sections, and flat black sleeving for the cables. Speaking of which, this build has a decidedly small footprint despite being a full ATX system and an open chassis design. Now, this was achieved by using a sort of sandwich approach, with the radiator and the PSU on the back and the motherboard and vertical GPU on the front. The cables themselves were then made from scratch and passed through the internal panels from one side to another. There's absolutely nowhere to hide clutter on a build like this, so much attention was paid to the cable routes and organisation. The build is then finished off with a CPU custom loop and a side illuminated ROG text panel. Now folks, how about time for something a little bit bombastic? How about a huge rig themed around a CSGO AK47 Crate, which moves? So the groundwork for this mod is an all acrylic superstructure. The exterior was first drawn up and then CNC cut from thick acrylic panels, which were then glued together and riveted to form a large box. Of particular note here is how the radius corners were achieved, because rather than 3D printing these and then using existing extrusions, the corners were actually milled from the solid plastic using a huge 25mm radius mill, which is absolute madness. Inside the floor of the case, you'll find an assembly of plastic gears, which connect to a side-mounted chain drive. Why, you might ask? To mechanically raise the rig inside, up and out of the top of the case, of course. This was then hooked up to a stepper motor and an Arduino so that it could then be controlled at the touch of a button. Not a bad party trick at all. With the chassis and mechanism sorted, attention was then turned to the rig itself. Making use of the Aorus Z490 Waterforce Extreme motherboard and Waterforce GPUs, naturally the system was fitted with a custom distro plate that keeps the tubing neat and parallel. The final parting details include full exterior paint job, custom cables, RGB lighting throughout, and of course illumination of the AK47 and front and rear side panels. As a final note, is anyone else curious about how much this thing must weigh? Tweaked Meshify S2 is one of those mods that has a lot more going beneath the surface than first meets the eye. Now, much of the internal chassis was removed in order to make way for a rather different radiator layout, with 360mm radiators placed on either side of the motherboard at an angle. The interesting flip side to this is that it's allowed for a surprisingly open layout, considering that the Meshify S2 is only a mid-tower, so it's not exactly huge. Now, the star of the show that makes this layout a possibility is the large rear panel distro, machined by Ruben of the Dutchman Modifiers. The distro itself not only carries the water paths between the main components, but also has the cables built in via a series of stepped paths, and this allows the cables to be visible in neat rows from behind the case. The result is a very uncluttered appearance, with the motherboard and GPU keenly highlighted thanks to the roof fan lighting and water block LEDs. Now, remember how I said last month to expect plenty more cyberpunk themed builds? Well, what you know, we've got another one. Thankfully, Toru Sekiguchi has thrown in his A game and come up with a cracking mod, basing it around the samurai band from the game. This calls for a lot of bright and contrasting colours, so Toru set about stripping down his Inwin 925 and painting it a vibrant yellow. This paint job was further carried out onto the fans and then matched with decals for the CPU block via UV printing. A really interesting addition to this mod is the rear panel reservoir. Now, of course, we see quite a lot of these, so what sets this one in particular apart? Well, aside from interfacing with the case in a way that makes it seem almost like a stock feature, this was Toru's first major attempt at one, and instead of it being machined, it was laser cut. Now, this is more of a choice based on his available tools, but it shows how different methods can indeed be used, and laser cutting is generally more locally available than CNC machining services, and it's almost always cheaper too. So worth bearing in mind if you'd like to give this a go yourself. To finish the mod up, custom cables were made in blues and yellows, and the custom loop connected with chrome-plated brass tubing. Remember folks, if you'd like to be with a chance of taking part and potentially winning some Corsair HydroX gear, you just need to have a completed project log over on the BitTech forums. Be warned though, we do like to see how the projects grow, so get in early and show us the progress start to finish please. It goes without saying that if you're new to the channel, also don't forget to subscribe as modding really is our jam. We're going to have plenty more part reviews, tutorials, as well as project logs the likes of which you will not find anywhere else, I guarantee. So you really don't want to miss out. You can also find us over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and builds.gg. Our Discord server is also linked below and is the best place to stay up to date with ongoing projects and other tidbits. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, make sure you have a look through our merchandise store, again linked in the description. We've got plenty of sweet shirts, hoodies and mugs up already and we'll be adding more in the future, so be sure to check back regularly. Take care folks, and I'll catch you next time.